Hello everyone, my name is Adam Michael Anthony Simpson and you're watching my YouTube channel, Adam M.A. Simpson. You're watching part 2 of my interview with Dr. Marlette Jackson, where we speak about her research on identity politics in Africa and how it affects political behavior. Check the description box below to cherry pick sections of this interview that you're particularly interested in if you don't have the time to watch a full interview. But please watch the full interview because it helps. So I'm going to move on to speaking more about your research and how that prepared, if there's a connection that you could make. I think academics tend to a lot of the process of getting the PhD is learning how to learn and learning how to analyze an issue or a problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem solving aspect is actually the skills that you get, not necessarily the actual work itself, even though that's impactful and important. It's the problem solving that's where the training is. So can you tell us of your research focus during your PhD? I know that you mainly focus on identity politics, so identity is race, gender, ethnicity, and religion in Africa and how it affects political behavior. Why is it important to study these topics and how can it educate us for the future? I mean, I guess with the American elections, if you could make any connection, especially in America for identity politics, bring it together. Educate us.
So I think what really kind of sparked my interest in undergrad was I was my minor was in Africana Studies, and I really got to understand how different components of the African diaspora influenced decision-making, policies, politics, cultures everywhere, literally everywhere. And so when I got to grad school, I wanted to kind of hyper-focus specifically on the African continent, specifically on, in African politics, you typically pick a region, West Africa, you do Southern Africa, you do East Africa, Central, you do North Africa. I hyper-focused on East Africa because it's an area that's understudied in African politics compared to West Africa, for example, or Southern Africa. And because I found, there was something about Ethiopia in particular that really drew me in. I think part of it is the history of the country. When you think about all of the amazing kind of historical kind of factors and people and things that they've done, my times when I was in Addis Ababa or in different parts of Amhara or Oromia or Tigray, it was amazing. The history of Ethiopia, it's a cradle of civilization.
Yeah.
Where coffee was created. There are still castles that are all over the country, in Gondar in particular, where you can see, a lot of people think of castles and monarchies and really, civilized kind of governance only happened in Europe. No, there were many civilizations all around the African continent that had that. And it was just amazing to connect on that level of wow, I'm in kind of this historic and amazing and beautiful sacred place.
Yeah.
And so, but one of the things that happens in a lot of places is that when it comes to political behavior, aspects of your identity influence your decision making, right? So when we think about how we are kind of socialized in this world, I'll take the US example. When we think about, for example, gender identity, right? We are kind of socialized for women to act one way, for men to act another way. We are now open to introducing the concept of those who are non-binary. No one has an idea of how people who identify as non-binary. She enacts, but because we have been conditioned and socially accepted to internalize ways that we should behave or think or be seen or be valued, it directly impacts how we vote. It directly impacts who we align with, who are politicians.
Yeah.
And research has shown that people typically who share your identity are more likely to represent your interests. Why? Because you're more likely to be aligned in interests. So a lot of the research has shown that, for example, women are more likely to talk about women's interests and women's rights. So then women have, obviously an incentive to be more active proponents for women politicians. And so when we're thinking about how identity influences behavior, it's a very kind of complex but very intermingled tie. And I thought it was fascinating to study and apply that to the context when we're thinking about more corporate communities, because it's the same thing. So when we think about, for example, one process that is driven with bias, our performance evaluation, women are more likely to receive personality-based criticisms and evaluations. So people are more likely to say, oh, she's cold or she's abrasive. Men, and also women of color, particularly Black women, are more likely to be tone policed. So, saying things like, oh, she's just an angry Black woman. Why is she so emotional? When exhibiting the same level of passion or the same level of concern over an issue as someone who doesn't also, come off or is perceived to be a Black woman. So identity is something that, based on our identities, it impacts how we see the world, but also based on how people see us, it impacts how they act towards us. And then that then influences who we want to see in political office. So, or who we want to see on corporate boards, or who we want to see as our manager, or who we are moving in as our direct reports. So identity is interconnected and interwoven into almost everything that we do. And so I think it's an important thing to study and to better understand, so then we can help corporations kind of unpack our biases and blind spots given our identities to create more equitable opportunity for all employees.
Awesome. That's so, wow. Thanks for that answer. And I love that you tied it into like corporate and DEI, because someone close to me got an evaluation recently that they were the top of their group, but they seemed to be angry, or not angry, but arrogant, when they're just clearly passionate and know what they're doing. So I don't know. This person is a Black woman. So
I remember I was working for a client, and there was someone kind of giving parts of our team were giving a presentation, parts of our team were kind of doing other types of work. And afterwards, the client came to my supervisor, not me, to my supervisor, and was like, is Marlette okay? She seems a little disinterested. And, my supervisor was like, well, what do you mean? Like, she's on the computer. She didn't really seem happy to be there. And when I asked some of my colleagues who were there, I was like, did I seem disinterested? They're like, no, like you were the most outwardly smiling person. You engaged people. They're like, what is that? I was like, I don't know. They're like, oh, was I just typing on the computer too much? They were like, no, there's two other people sitting next to you typing on the computer too. But none of them, were given the feedback that they were disinterested or just, seem as if they cared, or, were not as happy or jovial. And I mean, situations like that happen for women of color, for people of color, for folks from a variety of different backgrounds every day.
Yeah.
And it's just really annoyed when then that gets codified into performance evaluations, and that prohibits them from, or prevents them from ascending to higher level positions, which is what we see.
Yeah.
So, shame.
Shame. So, going back to your training, what skills developed during the pursuit of your PhD have translated to your professional skills that you currently hold?
So many. And when I was going on the job market, I was like, I don't like what I think as you're going through the process, you only think that your PhD is setting you up to be a faculty member, and that's just simply untrue. It's setting you up to do well in almost any space in any industry, and that's because you learn a few critical things. So, for example, social science PhDs, for my program in particular, we had to go through some rigorous kind of, research methodology courses. And that helped me understand the fundamentals of data analysis, the fundamentals of knowing how to run models and understand, like, what does this mean? How to then interpret that. And that's critical in the space that I'm in now, where it's like, I have to translate data into something that's applicable for, the folks that I work for every single day. It's like, we have this data point. This is what we can do. This is a policy or practice that it impacts. And I learned that training through my PhD progress, my PhD program. Another thing is, for example, management of teams. So you're overseeing a lab, for example, and in the hard sciences, or for me, when I was, part of my PhD process was collecting data in Ethiopia, in Kenya. I had to manage these large teams. So it's project management experience. Managing large teams, international teams, to collect surveys of over 1,000 respondents, and then analyzing that data and then synthesizing that into a report. It's a long report, the dissertation, but that's how I would sell myself in interviews of the skills that you need. I have done, and I have done on a larger, more global scale. And if that's what you're looking for, I can definitely do it on the smaller scale as well. Those are two of the things when I think about the skills that you learn, in addition to facilitation. So you have to TA. In the program. I think I had to TA 4 or 5 times. And so I know how to put together a cohesive presentation from start to the finish. I know how to connect with multiple types of audiences. I know how to change my content to be more interactive or engaged, or depending on the nature of the audience, if I'm going to a conference, make it a little bit more focused and high level. So I learned how to adapt my content given the audience. I've learned how to create something that is understandable and digestible for multiple levels. I've learned how to facilitate. And I've obviously honed those skills in my current role, but the fundamentals of that were born in the PhD.
That's awesome. This is very good information for academics worried about, getting a job, or worried about their impact and how they can go out in the world and, impact society. I think being able to recognize the skills that you've developed is very important, and this is a prime example of that. So I'm going into my favorite question of the interview, which is, what misconceptions of graduate school would you like to dispel for people interested in higher education?
I love that question. I think for one, it's that you don't have to look a certain way to do a PhD. And in a matter of fact, the look of the PhD student or the faculty member is changing every day, and you can contribute to that change. I think another misconception is that you have to come from a certain background to succeed. And I think not only my story, but the story of a lot of my women of color friends suggest otherwise. I'm actually, I don't know if I told you this, starting a podcast called Applied Collective, which is with myself, Dr. Nidia Perez-Gracia, Dr. Courtney Pena, Dr. Aditi Velosa, and Dr. Miranda Stratton. All women of color, all first-gen low income, all PhD graduates from Stanford University.
Wow, I love this.
I know, right?
Yes.
And what we're trying to do is dispel this myth that you have to be, act, look, feel, or exist as a certain type of thing to be successful in graduate school. because all of us come from so many different backgrounds. Some of us, are immigrants. Some of us, identify who are multiracial. Some of us are folks who come from low-income backgrounds. Some of us are folks who came from single-parent family homes. Some of us, and I think it's important because what we try to always preach is we are great, not, in spite of being women of color who are fly, but because we are women of color and because we're fly. And I think it's important for us to have use these types of platforms to let other younger women of color who want to get into this know that it does not matter kind of where you start, but it matters that what we're hoping to do is create cultures and communities where you can really thrive in these backgrounds and in these spaces and these institutions that weren't built for communities of color. And so I think that's one of the misconceptions. And the second misconception I want to dispel is that by going to graduate school, you are a failure if you decide not to go into academia. I think that that's something that stressed me out, gave me anxiety, because obviously, we're in a system where they want to replicate, our advisors want to replicate themselves. They want another person who they can say, and so, who I was a chair of their committee, is now at Yale. And publications at the top rated journal and da-da-da-da. Why? Because that's an indicator of success for them. So it makes sense that they're incentivized to produce more versions of them. But just because you decide to go an alternate route doesn't mean that you are a failure. It just means that the route that you are choosing is something that's better for you, for your community, for your family, for your life goals, for your person. And so you don't have to go the route that is, set for you. Consider alternate paths, and throughout the process, I would say engage in different opportunities to make sure this is what you want to do. Because it was me dibbling and dabbling in the advocacy groups, dibbling and dabbling in consulting, where I found out that this is not maybe academia is not for me. And I still have my hat in it. In my current job, it's an academic medical institution. So I'm still getting to interact with faculty and students, but my main role is staff facing. So I still like the heart piece of wanting to create inclusive spaces for people who look like me. I can still do that, but in multiple realms. And so I would say those two things is we're dispelling the myths of what a PhD looks like. And we're also dispelling the myth that by not going to academia, you're a failure, because you're not. Your success is completely your own, and you shouldn't let anyone else define it.
Exactly. Also, you make more money outside of academia.
You do. That's real.
Success, baby. Yeah.
That's on financial goals.
Yes. I think it's also like there's so few academic jobs in the first place. So not everybody can get an academic job. And it's also I think the current academic how academia is organized is outdated. It's archaic. It's outdated. And we need to think about changing. Actually, think this should be a PhD. Thinking of academia, like research output and the quality of the PhD students that you graduate in terms of like in an economic way. So instead of it being money, thinking of like publications and the skill of the PhD student. I don't know. I've been ideating on how to measure success from a PhD, and all of my ideas point to having to change the mentorship during academia. During your PhD, and changing how professors advise PhD students, because I don't think that, honestly, I think professors have too much power over their students, and and it affects, if you don't have a good advisor, then I'm sorry for you. Your experience can be horrible. So it's like a luck of the draw kind of thing. I mean, I lucked out. I love my advisor. He treats me very, very good.
Disclaimers here.
But yeah, that looks kind of. Anyways, but yeah. Anyways, this was so good. I think you touched on so many different themes that I've been noticing in doing these interviews, and also you're so eloquent and like really bring everything together. A skill that I'm still trying to perfect. Yeah, and I am going to end the interview now, but is there any last thing that you'd like to say before we end?
Parting words, final words. I guess my last piece of parting advice or guidance or whatever would be, one of the things that I've had to learn or have struggled to learn is that not all advice is good advice, and that sometimes you just have to go with how you kind of feel when navigating situations, and it's a part of building that inner resilience, that inner kind of EQ, and that inner kind of just bravery in yourself for navigating things, and taking other folks' advice and guidance, but knowing that it is also coded with their own biases and identities and behaviors and backgrounds and experiences. So take it with a grain of salt and do what's in your heart.
Agreed. That's a nice ending. All right, Team Marlette, until next time.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. Bye. Thank you for watching part 2 of this interview with Marlette Jackson, Dr. Marlette Jackson. That is, stay tuned for next week's video, and please like, subscribe, and click the bell button for notifications of when I've uploaded a new video. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.